Is the United States of America headed toward a recession before the 2020 election? This seems to be a question that a lot of people are starting to talk about, starting to take more seriously. And it's not just as simple as, well, this is like a political talking point because the presidential election is coming up. We saw the Fed lower interest rates just a few weeks ago. There's a whole lot of people who seem to be, that's a fair indication that they're actually a little bit concerned that we could slip back.
Yield curves are inverting. Gold prices are up. I think Bitcoin might be up as well.
Bitcoin's doing quite well.
Stock market's all over the place. ECB negative interest rates.
Yeah, these are some serious signs that something is not right. And of course, me and you have been saying basically since we've been podcasting together that of course something's not right. And it seems to me that if you look at the Austrian perspective on the Austrian economics perspective on the U.S. economy, that seems to me to be the only economic outlook that I've come across that makes sense. That when you see it through that, from that angle, that you go like, oh, okay, I get what's happening here. I get why the stock market can take these crazy, like have a day, they can be up 700 points and then down 700 points one day to the next, based off what a rumor that the Fed might do, or a rumor about a sanction or something like that, or not a sanction, but a tariff, I meant to say. It seems like what we've been saying for a long time is that, look, this whole thing is kind of a house of cards, and this is a scary position to be in. And we've said basically since we were talking, I don't even want to, I don't know. I guess if when did I start this podcast? Like 2012 or something like that. And probably if you had ever asked me since 2012, so the last, 7 years, if you had said, do you think there's a chance there could be a big recession this year? I would have said yes. And, I haven't been right. I mean, there hasn't been one yet, and I'm surprised it's lasted this long. But still, if you were to ask me, is there a chance? I'd say yes. And I actually think that every year there's not a recession, and we continue with this crazy fiscal policy, this crazy monetary policy, we make the recession that's inevitable worse. Like, it's going to be worse. It's kind of like, like the analogy Peter Schiff always uses, like getting drunk and having a hangover. It's like you're hammered and you're like, so am I going to be hungover? And you're like, absolutely. You are blackout drunk. And you're like, well, what if I keep drinking for another hour? You're like, now the hangover is probably going to be worse.
But then you do some Coke for breakfast and you're like, all right, we're back up.
Yeah, that's quantitative easing for you. It's Coke for breakfast. But still, at some point in that day, you're going to need a pretty extended nap. And that's the recession. Economics. Now you get it. But it is, there was like a piece in the Washington Post that was out the other day that was basically saying, Donald Trump is actually very concerned. They're very concerned in the White House.
We were saying when
Trump, by the way, take that with a grain of salt because I always say this is what Trump's feeling or whatever, but that makes sense. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we were saying before Trump came in that his biggest blunder was taking credit for the stock market, and that also, the most likely scenario is that they'll crash on him before the next election because that's how you make sure that you can turn over who's in charge.
Yeah.
Now, what Trump did, which was really smart, is he kind of got ahead of it and he attacked the Fed. He politicized the Fed and said, hey, I know what you guys are trying to do here. And so he's kind of set himself up with that out where if they do crash the economy on him, he can call them out on it and go, hey, guys, I'm your only safeguard. Look at what government's really trying to do to you.
Or look at what the swamp.
Yeah, look at what the swamp's doing. So that he kind of protected himself a little bit.
Yeah, well, politically, it makes sense why he would start blaming the Fed and trying to get them to lower interest rates. However, if you're actually trying to help the country, I think that's the worst thing he could do. And you touched on it right there that, the best thing Donald Trump could have done, and I don't mean to get reelected or for his own legacy or anything like that. I mean, like, if you actually were looking at this, like, if you were looking at it like a doctor, not like a lawyer.
Yeah.
Like if you weren't looking at it like, how can I win, like a lawyer, but you were looking at like, how can I solve the problem, like a doctor. What you would have wanted to do when you first got in there is to say, first of all, hey, this whole thing's a bubble. Obama didn't bail us out of the Great Recession. And by the way, that's why I won the presidency, because ordinary people basically, like they're still feeling a lot of the recession. But this whole thing's a bubble. It's all built on artificially low interest rates and high government spending. This is doomed, and we got to deal with it now and be like, and then if he did that and really advocated like sound fiscal and monetary policy. I understand he doesn't have complete control of the monetary policy, but he does appoint the Fed chairman. There were people, he could have picked someone great. He could have put Jim Grant as the head of the Fed or something like that. And if you had some type of like reasonable historic level interest rates, I think you would have started to deal with the real bad economy. But if he had just said, hey, yeah, this whole thing I inherited was a bubble, and then the economy did very bad, he could still say, yeah, that's right, that was their disaster. Same way as if Donald Trump came in and ended all the wars right away, and then something terrible happened in Afghanistan or something terrible happened in Syria, he'd be like, yeah, that's why Bush and Obama shouldn't have ruined those countries. I don't know what to tell you, man. Like that, this is their failure, not mine. I'm just getting our kids out of this. You know what I mean? Like, and that would have, to me, been the best path forward to actually solve the problem. The problem is, much like all the other politicians, Trump doesn't have the stones to actually do that. And I get it. That's not going to be pleasant. That's not going to be a pleasant experience. That's going to be very tough. What Trump did instead was basically immediately start bragging about what an unbelievable success the economy was because of his own greatness. And the funny thing was, Trump was doing this like a couple months in. He was doing this before he had implemented anything. Just by Donald Trump being there, his presence made this whole thing so great. It was the faith
the markets had in Donald Trump.
Yes.
Well, the only part of that was somewhat true was that Wall Street reacted positively to his initial tax cuts.
Well, look, once he got the tax cuts through and he got some deregulation done, particularly in the energy sector, but there was some deregulation. I have no doubt about it that those were good things. Those helped the economy. But when he would be bragging about these numbers and the stock market and the unemployment rate and the jobs created, and a lot of people, what was the standard Democratic talking point in response to that?
This was Obama's
recovery. And you inherited Obama's. And actually, look, if you look at the numbers, if you're going to look at the world that way, they kind of have a point.
Yeah.
They do have a point. The stock market was going up, jobs were being created, unemployment was going down. Like, if we're using these same metrics, like the same way now,
just like the housing bubble burst was actually Clinton's recession. That was the same thing the Democrats were saying then.
What? That it was Bush's?
Yeah, during Bush's era, that this was Clinton's recession.
Well, no, of course, right. None of them would make that
play.
point.
It's all about when you're there, yeah.
But, look, I mean, I guess just for political purposes, when the housing bubble crashes in 2008, it's a little bit harder to blame 1999 than if you come in 2009 and you're blaming 2008. So... Look, you are correct that a lot of the bubble was blown up under Clinton. Really, it was the tech bubble that then kind of went into the real estate bubble. But a lot of that bubble was blown up under W. That was his own bubble that collapsed in a lot of ways.
And I was reading the other day, which blew my mind, housing debt now is actually above where it was before the last collapse.
Yeah.
And then you look at student loan debt, and then you look at the fact that we're at peak employment, and then you look at natural cycles in the market with recessions, and you look at all the government spending.
So this is the situation that we're at now, is that we're actually, if you just look at natural cycles, and natural cycles in modern nation state economies, we're actually about due for a recession. And the problem that people are starting to realize, right, is that if Donald Trump is bragging about how great the economy is, so before the recession comes, we're starting with interest rates that are, okay, they're not at zero anymore, but now, I mean, what are they at? They're still crazy low at under 2%, okay? And we're running trillion-dollar deficits annually. So what the hell do you do when a recession comes then? If their answer is always, during a recession, you put your foot on the gas pedal, right? That this was Obama's justification for all the government spending and the 0% interest rates. So this is where and as you point out, all these people are carrying all this debt that they can barely hold off now.
How are all these people with debt going to spend more money? That's your solution if we've got a consumer economy and you're like, we need people to spend more. And they're like, yeah, but we already spent more than what we had. What more are we going to spend?
And if you realize that we have a consumer economy where everybody's in debt, you start to realize that it's like, oh, we don't really have a consumer economy. We have a debtor's economy. We have an economy that's completely run off people's ability to borrow more money and spend more than they have. And if people have to at all start dealing with that, this whole thing can come down very, very quickly. So
here's the other side of it that's just kind of nuts. So part of what I think forced the Fed's hands into, and Janet Yellen said this, she said it's a global economy. This idea that we're our own country and that we should be making decisions that best suit us no longer exists. And the reason being that every single country is debasing its currency, and if we don't kind of all debase our currencies at certain at the same levels, all of a sudden one currency is worth a lot more, and people start realizing, oh, this government printing money thing doesn't really work. All of a sudden, my currency is worth significantly less relative to this currency. So when you have, the ECB going into negatives, it kind of forces the U.S. hand where if we ramp up our interest rates and all of a sudden dollar demand goes way up and the dollar starts being worth a hell of a lot more than the euro, people realize, oh, this money printing thing, that doesn't work. We're losing value in our currency. So, in other words, every government's in this racket where they're trying to pretend, hey, we can print a lot of currency and it doesn't have a negative effect on our, on savers. It doesn't have a negative effect on, our population.
Right.
And so if they're not all in on that racket at similar levels, it blows the illusion. And when they tell you, hey, we're a world currency, that's what they're, not a world currency, but it's a world economy. That's what they're really talking about, is that the people in power, the people at the Fed, the people who want to have money for, to pay, for all the fucking military gear and also to give handouts, it all relies on governments being able to print money, and they got to debase it like a similar ratio. It's insanity.
Right. No, it is very, it's synchronized insanity on a global scale. But that
what's
doesn't
up with the
mean
ECB and negatives? What's been going on there that they got to force? If you're negatives, you're basically trying to force people to spend.
Right.
You don't want, because you're charging them for holding money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in other words, you are going to, the pace of inflation is going to be more than the interest that you could make on saving money.
So you got to spend it.
Unless you're gambling it essentially on Wall Street.
Right.
So that's the other thing, is that
Which
it
Japan's
incentivizes.
been the model for, hey, they've been doing it forever and it's been working out, supposedly.
Yeah, but I mean, really, if you look at it, it's been, the economic growth in Japan has been terrible over that period of time. So the idea that it's been working out, I think, is not accurate. Look, the truth is that, just back to the point that we were discussing before.
They're fucking you.
Yes, they're fucking you over. No question about that. But once Donald Trump, and even though there were the good things that he did, and I have no doubt in my mind that if he hadn't passed the corporate tax cuts and he hadn't passed, he hadn't deregulated to some degree, I think the economy would be doing worse than it is now. Thanks for watching, guys. Just want to tell you real quick about Monday.com. It's a great management tool for any business of any size. Go to Monday.com/problem. You get a 2-week free trial. Check out that awesome service. Thanks again.